What's up, y'all? This is TJ with Fake It or Make It, and I am here to tell you that I suck at making videos. You can probably tell that this is a voiceover, and that is due to the fact that whenever I was recording all of this, I did not realize that my microphone on my camera wasn't working. So, in order to try and salvage as much of my footage as I can, I'm just going to kind of do some voiceover here and there and explain what's going on. Right here in the intro, I'm just discussing a little bit of backstory about this Revelation 12 gauge shotgun. I dated it somewhere between the late 50s and early 60s. Like I said, it's a Revelation 12 gauge shotgun, and they sold them at Western Autos at in their stores in various locations. It was a really common gun, and it was really a good shotgun. And this particular shotgun was heavily used by a good friend of mine. His great uncle was an avid outdoorsman and a huge lover of bird hunting. So this gun's seen a lot of field time. It has definitely paid its dues. It was used to harvest a lot of birds and different game. And for as old as it is and as heavily as it was used, it's actually in pretty good shape. Now, the stocks on the wood furniture on this gun is birch, so it's not actually walnut, and they're kind of beat up. And what they did was, back in the day, if they wanted to give the illusion that it was walnut, I think that they would actually mix some lacquer with some sort of dye or stain or whatever, and they would just coat it on there, and you couldn't really see any wood grain. It just kind of gives the illusion. So we'll have to handle that in a different way. The gun really wasn't that rusted up. It had a few little spots where it had some deep pitting, but that'll be easily taken care of. It's got some engraving with a couple of bird dogs on it. The gun is completely intact and is still 100% functional as it is. But the idea with projects like this is we want to stop the rust and preserve this gun as best as we can so that future generations can appreciate it. Again, this gun isn't, some kind of museum piece, and it's not worth a lot of money. It has a very high monetary, not a high monetary value, but a very high sentimental value. And, a lot of people can't afford to just bring it to, a $100 gun or a $50 gun to a gunsmith and spend several $100s getting work done to it. So that's where I come in. I just really love taking these old guns and cleaning them up and giving them a second chance. So as we get into this video, I'll be talking about the various processes that I'm going through, and let's just get into it. You'll notice that this particular time lapse didn't last very long, and here in the camera you can see what I'm looking at in the bolt hole that holds the buttstock up to the rear of the receiver. There's some paper stuff down in there. And what really caught my eye was that it had lettering and text on it, and I really didn't want to tear this up pulling it out, because I knew that you could just tell that it was really brittle and really old. So I wanted to take my time and pull this out, because nobody told me that this would be in here. Nobody knew that it was in here except probably the original owner. So I wanted to conserve whatever this was as best as I could, and not just go tearing it out willy-nilly and destroying what possibly could be a pretty cool item that was stuffed in there for one reason or another. So after about probably 30 minutes of really carefully pulling this out, I pulled one piece out, it tore, and I was able to finish getting the rest of this plug of paper out. And ultimately, what it is it's an old classifieds ad with a crossword puzzle on it. And for whatever reason, it was stuffed down in there, but there was another surprise waiting for me at the bottom of this hole. So right here, I set a cup on my workbench, and after doing some poking and prodding and scraping around in the bottom, you can see that I've broken loose this mass of lead buckshot that was crammed down on top of the bolt that holds the stock to the receiver. And there was quite a few buckshots in this hole, and I guess that lead had oxidized, and it's got like this white powdery substance around it, and it was really kind of made like a almost like a mortar around the buckshot that was stuffed down in there. And it took a lot of poking and scraping and pecking at it with various long pointy objects that could get down there and reach it. And it was kind of difficult to get them all out of there. But once I got them all broke up, they all came out, and I was able to get to the bolt to eventually take the stock off the back of the gun. But I'm really curious to know if any of you have ever seen this or know why this person would have done this. I've kind of went over some different scenarios in my head as to why a person would do this, but none of them seem to make sense to me. So if y'all have any idea, please let me know. I'm always willing to learn things, and uh, definitely curious about that. So now that I've gotten all the buckshot and paper and all that other nasty crud out of the hole, um, I'm able to use my big flathead screwdriver to remove this bolt or screw or whatever you want to call it, and ultimately get the buttstock off. See, yeah, that's quite a bit of buckshot that was shoved down in that hole. And there's the newspaper I'm trying to show you there. Honestly, I thought that this screw was gonna fight me a lot more than it did, due to the fact that all of that stuff was crammed down in there and that lead was sitting directly on the bolt, and it had all that white chalky substance in there. I really thought that the bolt was going to fight me a lot harder than it did. But luckily, whenever I started turning on it, with just hand pressure, I was able to break it loose and pull it all the way out with no problem. So that was definitely a good sign that this gun was going to come apart relatively easily. With the buttstock removed, I was able to go forward with the disassembly of the shotgun. And usually this is pretty straightforward. Here I'm just kind of going over and looking at the individual components. This here is what I guess you could call the trigger group, fire control group. I don't really know the proper nomenclature, but all the springs seem nice and strong. They have a good tension to them. There's a little bit of surface rust on top of the chrome that is on top of what I call the loading gate there. Um, but overall, everything looks to be in good shape as far as the springs and the hammer and everything that's concerned in this cassette right here. So there's really no worry. I don't plan on taking this particular component all the way apart. I'm just going to drop the hammer, make sure that the hammer doesn't get dropped on accident and damage any parts. And from here, I'm just doing a quick once over and inspecting, inside the receiver, checking out the bolt carrier group, if that's what it's called. There's a little bit of minor rust in there, nothing major. Some belly button lint is up in there. But overall, the gun's still in good shape, even though we've gotten down to the nitty gritty of the situation. We're going to continue on. Here, I just like to put back some of the screws and kind of just really study everything and make sure that I have the placement of all the parts and components, really locked into my mind. And sometimes I'll even take pictures of some of the more complicated projects that I do, so that I can remember how all this stuff goes back together. Because if it takes more than 1 weekend to complete a project, more than likely I'll probably forget a few steps in reassembly. So I like to just kind of record everything so that I can have an easier time going back together with these older firearms. Right here you can see that I'm taking apart the magazine tube so that I can get the forestock off on the pump action part of the shotgun. Anytime you're pulling something apart that you know is under spring tension, you need to be careful to control the situation and hold down and control the spring as it comes out. Otherwise, you'll have some really hard to replace or irreplaceable part shoot across the room that you may never find, and that's a really high likelihood in my shop, because my shop is always a mess. Um, Thankfully, the magazine tube came out really easily, because I was reading that some of these Revelation shotguns had Loctite, some kind of black Loctite on the magazine tube, securing it to the receiver, and it was had to use heat to remove them. So I was really glad to find that the magazine tube just came right out, no problems. Um, I'm just trying to get this thing down to the barrel and the receiver. It has a rib, a barrel rib on top, and the two bead sights that were originally on it are broke off, and the owner's not really worried about trying to retap those holes or clean them out or put new sights on them because, like I say, this thing is just pretty much going to be a safe queen for future generations to enjoy. So I'm gonna keep working on this and get this down to just the barrel and the receiver. Here I've sped the clip up a little bit. I got the forestock off, and I noticed that, man, that is a really thin piece of wood atop of the tube that goes down the middle of the forestock. So I'm gonna have to be really gentle with that and not put too much squeeze pressure on it or pretty much any pressure at all, because we're gonna need to get that tube out in order to make sure that we get all the rust off of all the metal parts. So just got to be really gentle with that. And here I'm going to remove the bolt and get it out so that I can run it through the ultrasonic cleaner and get it nice and pristine. So this video has already gotten pretty long, so for the sake of brevity, I decided to cut out some of the more mundane parts, like where I cleaned all the metal up and neutralized the rust and touched up the bluing. Um, it really wasn't a lot of hard work. Just used a lot of elbow grease and some steel wool, fine steel wool, and really just touched up a lot of things and neutralized rust and basically got it to more of a conservation than everything, I guess you could say. And I really just slathered the oil on it and let it soak on all the metal parts. And here are the finer components that have been cleaned up and oiled and gone through and touched up, and just all the parts had all the rust neutralized, and the bluing was touched up and got the parts back looking good. And really, the bolt came out really nicely. I made sure that I got all that old scale and funk off of it and polished it back up with my Dremel. All of the rust was removed from the loading gate on the cassette for the fire control group. And here I'm going to show you the wooden furniture. I removed all of the old finish with some card scrapers. And that's the easiest way to do it, because if you try and sand this wood, all that old finish is just going to clog up your sandpaper and just make a mess. So the easiest way to do this is just to card scrape all that old finish off. It comes off in flakes and chips. And it was able to reveal a pretty nice looking birch wood beneath it with some fairly decent looking grain. And I used some dark walnut for my first coat, and it was still a little bit light. And then eventually I came across with some black ebony stain that I had in a Varathane, in the brand of Varathane, and that got me down to a darkness that I really liked, and it really looked more like walnut than it did before, in my opinion. So just letting that stain soak in and cure for a little while. There's my curing pot for my rust blue solution. And just going to wait on this stuff to dry, and I'll start oiling the gun stocks with some True Oil and get ready for the next step of probably putting this thing back together. Real quick, I wanted to show you guys, um, this is just a really simple process to doing this wood on these guns. I use True Oil. I know a lot of people use different stuff, but True Oil has always been pretty simple and straightforward for these old guns that I work on. It really, you can get it as slick as you want. You can do a lot of things with it, and it dries pretty quickly. And here, I just put some rubber gloves on because I got some cuts on my fingers and stuff, and it just kind of grosses me out knowing that maybe some kind of oil is getting into those cuts on my fingers. I guess I'm a sissy these days, but whatever. I'll just be a sissy. But I just put it on my fingertips and just rub it in and massage it. And some of the stain got loose again, but I just kept massaging that oil, the true oil and the stain back into itself. And I'll do this several times. And between each coat, I'll use a fine steel wool and burnish and cut that shiny layer down, and just make sure that none of the wires from the steel brushes, um, the steel wool is attached to the finish before I put another coat on. At this point, I probably had, I don't know, maybe 3 coats on it, and ultimately I will probably have 5 or 6 coats, and it just gives a nice, pretty, protective finish, and with a nice even sheen on on each of the parts. And I've just always liked the way the True Oil looks, and its ease of application. So yeah, I mean, and if you have a gun that you want to use this True Oil on, it's not that big a deal to do. You can even touch up spots, and it's just really easy to work with. So I do recommend it. After I got probably 6 coats of True Oil on the stocks, I figured it was time to start reassembling this old 12 gauge. And I will say that whenever you're going back together with these old guns like this, or any gun in particular, it doesn't matter. You if you get one step out of sync in your reassembly process, if you put one part in before you're supposed to put the other part in, then you got to go back and figure out what's going on and readjust yourself. So sometimes there's a give and a take, and you make mistakes no matter how many of these you've taken apart or put back together. But everything is going back together really smoothly. Um, the furniture turned out beautifully, looks really good. I believe, in my opinion, it looks great. And here, I'm just taking some one-shot pinstriping paint back from my custom painting days, back when I did airbrush work and pinstripe work. And I just used some of this oil-based paint to kind of push down with this popsicle stick down into the recesses on the safety button. And I thought this was just a nice little touch that only took just a few minutes. I just dabbed it in really light amounts down into the ribs that make those little ripples on the button. And then I just used a paper towel to remove the paint from the top of the ribs. And like I said, it only took a couple of seconds, and I think it was just a really nice touch that added to the overall look of the gun now that it's put back together. All right, so here it is. I'm reshooting the outro because I lost all of the audio to the original recordings of this project, and my shop is not exactly set up for recording right now like it has been in the past. It's an absolute disaster. It looks like a bomb went off in here, but and it's raining outside, so I have to just put some pictures up of this thing that in some decent lighting so you can kind of see. But everything came out really nicely. The wood, the furniture, you could tell it's not walnut, but it is what it is. It's birch, but it still looks really nice. It looks way better to me than it did originally, with just that old syrupy looking finish that you couldn't see any grain. I would rather see grain than not see grain. There was some dents that I ironed out with a hot iron and a wet rag. Um, it had a few gouges and dents, and some creases in it that I was able to remove and steam out. Again, this had a mid bead in a 4 bead, but they wasn't too worried about putting those back in there, which I mean, I don't blame them. It's not that big a deal. If they want to put the sights back on there at some point, they can. It's not a huge deal to do. The bluing came out really nicely. Like, again, I didn't do a complete blue. I did a conversion where I boiled the parts, killed the rust process, and then touched it up with some bluing agent, and just really slathered a bunch of gun oil on all these parts, and let it soak for a few days in wet oil. Then I came back and removed the excess oil off of the parts, ran patches and bore cleaners down the bore. Everything is in good shape. The gun functions as it should. The safety functions as it should. So everything is in working order. And at some point we'll try and get some test shots down this thing and make sure everything functions properly before we give it back to him. But I hope y'all enjoyed the video. I really enjoyed working on this old gun and hearing the stories about the man that carried it and all the cool hunting stories that he had. I appreciate the opportunity. You guys let me work on your family heirloom and maybe learn a thing or two. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them down in the comment section. And other than that, it's fake it or make it out.